Hi, I want to go beyond our textbook discussions of social justice and talk about two more modern day philosophers who talk about distributive justice, which has to do with what you own. How should we distribute resources, limited resources throughout society in a just way? And the first philosopher I want to look at is Robert Nozick, a libertarian philosopher. And libertarianism is a political party and a political platform that is alive in the US. And you might remember Gary Johnson as the recent libertarian presidential nominee. Well, Robert Nozick is the philosopher behind libertarianism and is a major voice on this philosophy. So the concern for Robert Nozick and libertarians is to make sure that resources are distributed in a just way. His theory is known as entitlement theory. He wants to know how one is entitled to the property that they claim for themselves. And his argument is that a system is just if everyone is entitled to the holdings they possess. And there's two kinds of holdings that we can consider. One being an original acquisition of holdings. Okay. And that's hard to imagine today because it seems like there's ownership claims on everything. But it would be a case where you came upon some property, some potential property that nobody else has ever claimed in the history of that property. So it is unowned property. And if it truly is unowned, then you can come upon it and claim ownership justly over it, because you haven't unjustly taken it from anyone who has a real claim to it. The ownings that we're more familiar with is the transfer of ownings. And that's where, of course, one person owns something and another person wants it, and the owner wants to provide, transfer ownership over to the other. And we need to question what makes that transfer of ownings just, okay? So that the new owner is actually entitled to what they've acquired. For Robert Nozick, there are some conditions that have to be met for a transfer of ownings to be just. One being that they can't be stolen, of course. Okay? So if I buy a bicycle from you, but you stole that bicycle, I actually don't have an entitlement to that bicycle. I don't have a ownership of that bicycle because through its history, it's been stolen. So someone else has just claim to that bicycle, not me. Okay, so the bicycle, or the property cannot be stolen. It can't involve fraud. Okay, so I can't fool you into relinquishing ownership over something and I take it from you. I can't misrepresent myself or the transaction when doing that. That would, make the transfer unjust. Okay, so it has to be open and everyone has to understand the nature of the deal. There can't be enslavement. Libertarians, like John Locke, think that people have an inalienable right to liberty. So as soon as somebody is enslaved, the products of the labor they produce, no one has, the owner of that slave has no just entitlement to that property. Okay, there needs to be free and open competition for the owning. Okay, so it would not be a just transfer of ownings if I establish some limit. Only such and such people can actually bid for the thing. So it would, this would eliminate discriminatory laws that say people of a certain race are unable to compete for this owning. Okay, so it has to be open competition for the owning, and nobody is excluded from it. Okay, so what we see is that for libertarians, the history of how something is acquired makes that acquisition just or unjust. Okay, so history is crucial. And that might seem obvious, but we can imagine a different sense of justice. Okay, if we look at what we can call a current time slice principle, we might say, well, if so and so has $1, so and so has $1, and then this guy over here has $4. Okay, we see that there's an unequal amount of resources among the people. One person is more wealthy than another, than two others. If we didn't take into account the history of how this person came to own that dollar, how this person came to own that dollar, and how that person came to own that $4, we might just look at the current time and say that the just distribution is the one that maximizes happiness for everybody involved. So we take that away. What we have here is a total of $6. And so we redistribute it so that this person has 2, this person has 2, and this person has 2. We have increased happiness. We have increased happiness. And we have increased unhappiness. But you'll see that there's more happiness in the world than unhappiness after we redistribute these people's ownings. If history didn't matter, this might seem like a just way to distribute property in a society. But the libertarian says that history does matter, and this would actually be an unjust distribution because these people don't have an entitlement to that extra dollar, so long as every dollar in this scenario was earned justly, adhered to all the requirements of a just acquisition of ownings. Okay. So, a famous thought experiment that Robert Nozick provides is the Wilt Chamberlain thought experiment. And Wilt Chamberlain is, or was, a famous basketball player. So what Robert Nozick has us do is imagine a scenario where Wilt Chamberlain is the greatest basketball player ever, and his contract with his former team has expired, and he's shopping around for a new team. And he ends up making a contract with a new team where this is a fair and just, there's no coercion, there's no fraud, there's no one tricking each other. And Wilt Chamberlain says, I'll play for your team for free so long as when people enter the arena, they buy their ticket, and then as they're walking through the gate, they see a Wilt Chamberlain bucket, okay? And they have to pull out $1 and put it in the Wilt Chamberlain bucket. And let's suppose that after a season, Wilt Chamberlain becomes 10 times richer than any other basketball player in the history of the sport, okay? Because so many people wanted to see him play and willfully put $1 into his bucket. Now, important to the thought experiment is that no one is required to see Wilt Chamberlain play. They cannot go to the game, and they can use their dollar to buy something else. So nobody is coerced, and there's no theft involved. And everyone is freely and consciously giving that dollar to Wilt Chamberlain. It's very clear from the bucket where that money goes to. And people make a decision, do I want to see this game? I want to see Wilt Chamberlain play or not? Yes, I do. I put the money in. Okay? And Wilt Chamberlain becomes incredibly wealthy, and Robert Nozick asks us, does anybody have any right to Wilt Chamberlain's money except for Wilt Chamberlain? And he argues no, because Wilt Chamberlain earned that money fairly and is entitled to that money. Okay, because all the conditions of a just transfer of ownings has been met. Okay, and that means that nobody has a right to that money, including the government. Because libertarians are opposed to many taxes, including an income tax. An income tax penalizes someone for making money, according to the libertarian, and unjustly, okay? Because they've acquired, through their labor, they've acquired that money fairly, and they solely are entitled to it. So we could see this play out very clearly in Gary Johnson, the Libertarian presidential candidate's proposals for tax reform. Gary Johnson wanted to get rid of property tax. You already own your property. No one has a right to continually, charge you for owning what's rightfully yours. So someone who owns a house under Gary Johnson's plan would not pay annual property tax. Okay, they own their house and no one else has a claim on it. Gary Johnson would also get rid of an income tax. So when you go to work, the government has no right to take money from what you've earned. That is between you and your employer, and you make an agreement, and all the money the employer pays you is yours. No one else is entitled to it. Okay, and he also would get rid of corporate taxes. Okay, the corporation, again, is the only entity entitled to the money that it makes, so long as it's not coercing people and so on. Okay, so what does Gary Johnson propose? Because we still have to have public education. We have to pay for our roads. We have to pay for our fire department, our public libraries, our police department, and so on. Where does that money come from? Well, it comes from a 28% federal sales tax. So just as you pay an income tax in Washington state, under Gary Johnson, you would pay a federal sales tax. And that might look like an incredible number, 28%, but let's consider the philosophy behind it. It's essentially the Wilt Chamberlain bucket. When you go and buy something, you know that 28% is tacked on to that purchase, and you know exactly where that money goes. It goes to the federal government. And you can make the choice to not buy the thing. Now, this might not work so well for food and so on, like essential goods. Like, you have to buy food, of course. But if you're thinking about buying a new chair and your other chair is working fine, but you find a more comfortable chair, well, you could always walk away from the purchase if you don't want to pay the federal government 28% on top of that sale. And so it creates a system where you are making a conscientious choice to give money to the government, and you know exactly where your money's going. And so that is money that the government would have a rightful claim to. But the government would not have a rightful claim to your property that you've already fairly acquired, and your income that you've negotiated with your employer, and so on.